Before I get into the main topic of today's video, I want to relate something that happened to me a few hours ago. I was in a bookshop and I took a look at a particular item on one of the shelves, which was a small red volume called Quantum of Dante. And Quantum of Dante was a tiny little red a red hardback volume about the size of one of these two here, but very, very thin. And it was the entire Italian text of Dante's Inferno, except every time the letters A-N-T or ant appeared in sequence, they were in bold, and all over the pages there were tiny little pictures of ants. And the front cover, instead of actually saying Quantum of Dante, it said Q-U, a picture of an ant, U-M, of D, picture of an ant, A-E. So it was Quantum of Dante. And this was apparently some kind of piece of conceptual art by a guy named Marco Sonzogni, who lives in New Zealand, somewhere or other, and reprinted the text of Dante's Inferno in this format to celebrate the 700th anniversary of Dante's death on May 25th. And so I looked inside the book and learned that it was copy number 300 of only 700 prints of Quantum of Dante. I might have actually bought it because it seemed rather interesting and a fun thing to have, but for the fact that it cost $40, and I'm just not going to spend $40 on a fully Italian copy of Dante's Inferno that is, of course, completely royalty-free on why would you spend money on that sort of thing? So if you have come into contact with a copy of Quantum of Dante, please tell me about it because I'm interested in knowing where some of the other numbers ended up. I think there were 4 copies in the bookshop where I went, and they were something like 300, 277, 289. It doesn't matter. The point is, tell me if you've seen anything like that before. But anyway, we move on to our main topic. Musical books. Not books about music, or books necessarily by musicians, but books that are music adjacent. Although actually only one of them fits that description, and that's this. Aloysius Bertrand's Gaspard de la Nuit. This is a music adjacent book because it inspired Maurice Ravel to create a suite of 3 piano pieces. I think it was in 1907 to 1908, although I could have got that wrong. I'm just going purely off memory here. And these are actually about 200 years older than that, or 150 years older than Ravel. So we're thinking let's have a look. There we go. I was right. 1807 to 1841. He was a very short-lived guy. And Gaspard de la Nuit, or Nuit, sorry, my French has never been that good, is a collection of prose poems about all sorts of things. It's sort of a summation of the Gothic from its start to its end. There's a big old introduction in this version of the book, which I will not sum up for you because it's massive and it's extremely in-depth, and I really just frankly haven't got the brain power to sort of talk about that at the moment. But you can look up all of this sort of thing about Aloysius Bertrand and about the book. I figured that I would keep this quite brief, and I just want to show you the 3 pieces that inspired Ravel's piano pieces. So let's see, they start with Ondine, which is 144. Let's go to 144. I won't read them either, I'll let you read them. So here's Ondine, and you can pause whenever you'd like. There we go. And I haven't tried reading them along with the actual pieces that Ravel wrote, but I feel like it would work very well, because I know the pieces fairly well, so here we go. Here's the gibbet. And right across the page, here's Scarbo. So that looks like it's in focus to me. What was the other one that particularly caught my attention? Well, a lot of them did. They're quite beautiful. They're all of these sort of pictures of the 1600s, because Aloysius Bertrand was this very sort of fantastical man, and he was a very sickly sort of person, and he he didn't go outside much, and he was a big fan of his adopted homeland Dijon, yes, as in mustard. And he sort of wrote he wrote about things from this very regional perspective, even though it doesn't appear that from a cursory exploration of the text that he actually wrote about Dijon much. I've never seen anyone talk about this book or anyone even really mention it, except in a couple of the comment sections for a couple of versions of Ravel's pieces, which, by the way, are best performed by a guy named Perlemuter, I think. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but it's spelled Perlemuter. So look for that name, Ravel, Gaspard de la Nuit, and you'll get the best versions of those pieces, I think. That particular performer actually studied under the composer, which is always the best way to learn about how the piece is supposed to be played. And so that's the version that I found myself liking the best. Anyway, we move on. I'm not quite sure which one of these two we'll do next. Let's do the Russian next. Testimony. The Memoirs of Dmitri Shostakovich, except they might not be, not really. We don't know. Only one of these pages, and I forget which page it is, so sorry about that, but I'm sure you can Google it. Only one of these pages was actually signed by Shostakovich, and it was all taken down by somebody else. It's really, scholars, and I think Maxim Shostakovich, Dmitri's son, thinks, that this is basically fiction, or fictionalized, and it is the work of Solomon Volkov. But I think a lot of people seem to think that the sentiment of this book, of this memoir, is true, even if the way that it's expressed and some of the expressions are not so much. Anyway, this isn't really so much a memoir as it is just a series of scattered observations in a rough chronological order. It's not something that progresses, here's 5 years of my life, here's another decade, here's the next. It's sort of, it goes back and forth and it talks about all sorts of different things. There's a fun section where he's talking about his opinion of Toscanini, the conductor, because Shostakovich never really liked him very much, apparently. And whenever anyone would gift him, and I'm not going to find the page now that I'm talking about it, because that's just the way these things work. But there's a bit in here where he's talking about people sending him Toscanini's recordings of his own work, and then Shostakovich would just use them as birthday presents for other people. I'll let you have a read while I'm talking. You can pause whenever you want. And he would just send them to other people as birthday presents, because he just hated those recordings and thought, well, I'm the only one who seems to hate them, so I might as well give them away. So that's the Memoirs of Dmitri Shostakovich, disputed by the family, and yet you'll find one or two people who I think still swear by this thing. So that's an interesting thing to have, I thought. And now we'll move on to the third and final in this tiny little trilogy, a Mammals notebook, the writings of Erik Satie, edited by... I looked up Ornella Volta, and the only other book I found related to this name was some kind of strange vampire thing. I'm not quite sure what it was. I didn't look too hard. To be honest, I wasn't that interested at the time. But I don't think whoever Ornella Volta is, they've done too much other stuff. Perhaps somebody else will know. Perhaps they can tell me. But this book is probably... Honestly, it's the most interesting of the three, even if it wasn't the one that invented prose poetry. Hello. I mean, I really, just getting back to this for a minute, I don't understand why more people don't talk about this, because this is beautiful. This is great. Even in English, when it's supposed to be, of course, originally French, I don't know why nobody's talking about this thing. This is just excellent. This should be a world classic, but I think this by Donald Sidney Fryer is only maybe the second translation into English that it's ever got. I could be wrong on that, but it's one of a very few translations, and it really does deserve more. But anyway, we're not talking about that anymore. We've moved on. A Mammal's notebook has... I don't know if this is everything Satie ever had his hand in, but it is sure as heck a lot of the stuff. including the texts not to be read aloud, which I will not read aloud. I'll let you read them, and I hope you're not reading them aloud either, because you're not supposed to do that. And here's some more. And you'll note these dried embryos. These turned into the names of some of his pieces, piano pieces. Now, of course, there's an introduction and a chronology and all the context that explains who this guy is. I'm not going to give you that information because you can find that yourself. But I will say, if you don't know Erik Satie, he's kind of the inventor of, or an inventor or a progenitor of ambient music, of minimalist music. He was a very, very strange guy. His most famous pieces are, of course, the Gymnopédies, famous for sounding not quite like elevator music. And he was the kind of person who wrote things like this and like this. I don't know how many times I've read these. I'm just going to show you, a few bits in quick succession, and you can pause as much as you'd like, of course. And he wrote, I don't know if he drew these. I think he may have. These pictures for sports and recreations, which was another piece that he wrote, or another series of pieces. Satie refused to eat foods that weren't white, and he wore, at some stage in his life, he took to wearing only purple suits. So he became known as the Velvet Gentleman. He had 7 purple suits, all of the exact same make and color in his closet. He lived in, there's a picture of it somewhere. I think he's drawn a picture of his own rooms. He lived in some tiny flat in Paris and just lived in absolute poverty, as you'd expect. And his room was just scattered full of just scraps of paper and rubbish. And I'm just trying to find that drawing. I don't think I'm going to find it. Sorry, this isn't making for very good visual sort of video making, but it does. You can find it. I'm sure you. Anyway, I want to highlight these because, as well as being a strange person in his personal life, Satie was difficult to work with and often just odd and ambiguous. He was this kind of musical Dadaist, and he didn't even call himself a musician, really. He called himself a phonometrician, somebody who plays with or manipulates or measures sound. And I don't know the extent of the musical education of anyone watching this, so I'll tell you that a performance indication is just the bit at the top left-hand sort of section of a piece of music that tells you how you're supposed to play it. So it'll say something like, forte, which means with strength or loudly and all that, mezzo forte, which I'm pretty sure is just even louder, although I could be wrong about that exactly. But you get the idea. And instead of putting things like forte and mezzo forte and, piano for quiet, he would put things like this. So you're supposed to play the piece cloisterly or, ceremonious. Okay, that kind of makes sense. Do as I do, which makes no sense because, of course, how many times would he be in the room? Behaving as though a monkey is watching you. These are his performance instructions. This is how you're supposed to play the piece. Isn't this ridiculous? God, I love these. I come back to these and just have a laugh all the time. These are great. Flat on the floor. I mean, for God's sake, how is anyone supposed to play a concert piece flat on the floor, or ironically? So I'll show you those. He also wrote this play. It was never very popular. A ballet in 3 acts. Uspud. And the other one, no, not Uspud, and not Socrates. Yeah, this thing, Medusa's Snare, a lyrical comedy in 1 act. And here's a drawing of, where are you? Where's the label? It's Jonah the Monkey by somebody else. Foundation Erik Satie. And he puts this whole play and the music that goes along with it. I'm sorry, I know I haven't framed it right. But you get the idea. Here he wrote some speeches and essays. Epistle the First of Erik Satie to Catholic artists and to all Christians. That brings us, look at that signature, my God. How ornate. To Saint Saëns, Memoirs of an Amnesiac. This is it. This is the picture of his room. This is what he made of it. Monsieur Satie dans la maison. I know my French is terrible, there's no need to tell me. And we can see that he's got all sorts of strange notes in here. I want to point out, yeah, look, I am a phonometrician. My work is pure phonometrics. You get the idea. There's one more thing that I want to show you before we talk about the final part of this video. Ah, here it is. Where are you? Where are you? I'll let you read this page, actually. This is a good page. Have a look at that. Is that good? That'll be a bit easier, I think. Yeah, this is the kind of person we're talking about here, you see? You should smoke, my friend, for if you don't, someone else will smoke in your place. I mean, I bought this because I think I heard something like that, something somewhere else in the book, something ridiculous and abstract and just completely crazy, and I thought I would like to learn to think like that. And so one way I can do that is by reading this book. So that was why I bought it. What else is in here? There's all sorts of little essays and pleasures of the table, book loving, on reading, but he doesn't actually talk about reading that much. I think it's about almost everything else. Stravinsky. There's an essay on Debussy as well. But another thing that makes Satie interesting was his religious association with this cult group, or this kind of occult group. Oh, he also put some ads in the paper, by the way. Fake ads. So I'll show you some of those. And there's some private stuff. The private writings are the most interesting part of this, because they're where it gets really strange. I kind of don't want to show them all, because that would ruin the surprise, but I will show you this. A person who lives in a tower is a tourist. A person who lives in an automobile is an autocrat. A person who lives in a villa is a villager. And a person who lives in a tree is a treacle tart. Do you see what I mean? It's just absolutely charmingly ridiculous. But where was I? Also, very intimidating sort of cover, yes. And green. Odd choice. We'll just put that there for the minute. Erik Satie was a Rosicrucian, a member of the Church of the Rosy Cross. And I've tried to look these guys up, and I've never really been able to find out much about them at all. So I figured, where better to turn than this? The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. A semi-famous book among those interested in the occult. And, as we can see here, reproduced in all of its terribly formatted, self-published glory. God, there's nothing I love more than when books are just so obviously cheap, I mean, look at this. Just look at this. You can just tell it was done by some absolutely dedicated madman in some, obscure home. So look at the spacing of this. And this is, how long is this? 630 or so pages of esoterica, which includes everything from, Pythagoreanism to Rosicrucianism to the Kabbalah to just Freemasonry. Rosicrucian Doctrines and Tenets. Where are we going? Page 390. I haven't actually read this yet, so I don't know if we're going to find anything that I can really compress into a video, but I thought we might take a look just because I've got the book. Hey, why not? Here we go. This is why I couldn't find anything. Trustworthy information is unavailable concerning the actual philosophical beliefs, political aspirations, and humanitarian activities of the Rosicrucian fraternity. Today, as of old, the mysteries of the society are preserved inviolate by virtue of their essential nature, and attempts to interpret Rosicrucian philosophy are but speculations, anything to the contrary notwithstanding. But I still think we can get a clue as to the kinds of people they might have been through listening to Satie's music. Because what did he write? He wrote, there are 12 piano pieces, I think. Let me just open them here. I've got my computer here. So we'll just go into the music app because I've got all of his piano pieces. Where are you? Come on. He wrote a suite. Sonneries de la Rosicrucians. Yeah. And he wrote 3 pieces for the Rosicrucians. I won't play them through the terrible speaker. You can go and look them up. You're already on YouTube, aren't you? And I think that's all I've got to say on that topic. I know I haven't made a video in a while, so I figured I might as well update you as well on what's been going on. I've been quite busy. It's not really interesting to talk about, so I won't, but I will tell you that in the meantime, I've been reading 1 or 2 interesting things. This is quite good. Javier Marias, A Heart So White, and if anyone knows anything about this guy and can tell me where I should go next, or what book of his I should read next, that would be good. I would probably take your advice. But just while we were here, I wanted to point this out, because I've never seen this before. Limited edition proof copy, so it's not for quotation or resale. And I thought, I looked at that, and I thought, okay, so is this one of those pre-sale copies that they send to other authors so that they can get pull quotes? But of course, you'll see that, I mean, we already have pull quotes, so that can't be it. So I think this might just be a final copy for the editors in-house to just read over it one last time, make sure the margins are all right, and make sure everything's in order, there's no typos. For what it's worth, I couldn't find any typos, and we can see this. This uncorrected advanced proof is made available on a confidential basis and may not be sold or otherwise circulated. The appearance and contents of this proof may not resemble the finished book, and under no circumstances may it or any of its contents be reproduced before publication of the finished book without the publisher's consent. So it's a very interesting book, just for that alone. But I wanted to bring this one up. Particularly, I enjoyed this a lot, by the way. It's a book about connections and about wanting to be heard and about wanting to be seen and about privacy and about, well, it's a very human condition sort of novel. It's very, very good. But of course, you'd expect that. And I just wanted to show you pages 75, so I'll just move it up a bit for you. Read that in your own time. And page 80 as well. There we go. And there was a very good passage in here that I can't quite find at the moment that was all about translation. And I was thinking when I started this video, I was going to be smart and start talking about translation of this and of that and how it doesn't really make a difference or, what have you. But unfortunately, I can't find the blasted thing. Ah, no, I have found it. Here it is, 70. So I'll let you have a read of this, and I'll tell you my response to this. An instigation is nothing but words, translatable ownerless words that are passed from voice to voice and from language to language and from century to century. And when I read this, I'll let you read the rest of the page first. There we go. When I read that, it suddenly struck me that I would have preferred, were I a Spanish speaker and reader, and I had read the book in Spanish, I might have perhaps preferred to read it in English, as I really did, because I feel like that passage gave the book more meaning for having been translated. There's something I often say to myself and to other people, and you can think of this as a cope, because in some respects it is kind of a cope, and it's that there's no real way to translate anything properly, so it doesn't matter whether you're reading the language that the text was originally written in, because it's already been translated from an impression inside the author's head into text, and all text is a metaphor for a mental impression anyway. And then, of course, it's been translated in the sense that it's been typed up in a certain font and it's been put onto pages of a certain thickness with certain margins, and those pages are surrounded by a certain paratext, and the paratext is surrounded by a certain cover, and then the whole thing is found in a certain shelf in a certain bookshop, etc., etc. So the translation is really only one in about 9 or 10 steps that turn the book from how it was originally envisioned in the author's head into the thing that you receive. And that's basically how I justify not learning new languages, because I'm a lazy idiot. But you understand my point. I don't really believe that for everything. I don't believe it for poetry, for example, because the whole point of poetry is for the sound of the words to work. But for something like Dostoevsky, which I've also been rereading, and I won't hold up to the camera because you all know what Dostoevsky looks like, and there's no point. I went back and reread Crime and Punishment and Brothers Karamazov, and I was just struck by how easy it was to read. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but when I was 18 years old and I just got out of school, and I realized that I'd really fallen behind in reading because I'd read almost nothing but basic Gothic novels for about 2 years. And so I decided I really had to up my game and get with the classics. So as soon as I turned 18, I basically popped open Brothers Karamazov and expanded my mind beyond any previous limits. And since then, I've found almost everything else fairly simple stuff. Well, not simple, but, simple to understand once it was looked at hard enough and once the correct amount of attention was paid to it. So there's that. I've also been reading Dune. I didn't buy it. I've got it on this machine here, which is about 11 years old now and really showing its age. And somebody told me to go up to God Emperor. I'm not sure if I want to do that because I'm a few pages into Children, and so far it's been getting worse and worse. There's a funny thing with Dune, which is that in all of these pages, I think Frank Herbert has only ever described the desert as being a hot place about twice, and I've read a few hundred pages now. It's very internal, and everything is either incredibly in your face or so subtle that it's impossible to see things coming, except on a very, very close read, or, I assume, a second read. So tell me your impressions of that, if you've got any, and tell me if it really is worth going up to God Emperor, or even beyond that to Chapter House, I think the 6th one is called, and I've heard it ends on a cliffhanger, so it's going to disappoint me in that respect at least, but I don't really care about that sort of thing. So just tell me any thoughts you have on anything that I've brought up or shown you on the camera, or etc., etc. You know the drill. Thanks for watching.